Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft and the world in between. Let's get things started with news from the SAP side, and there I have one blog post that I would like to highlight, and that's getting started with a predefined CI/CD pipeline for Kyma runtime. This blog post guides you through on how to leverage the CI/CD service, so the SAP Continuous Integration and Delivery Service, living on SAP BTP in order to do the build and deployment of container-based applications, of course, towards the Kyma runtime. This blog post guides you through on how to do things, how to set things up, and get your first pipeline running. With that, let's switch to the Microsoft part of the house, namely to serverless. First thing, an announcement blog post around connecting app services with Azure SQL database using managed identity. That's a feature that was recently released. And this blog post guides you through on how to set things up with respect to system assigned identity and user assigned identity. So how you can use that. There is also a reference to more information about managed identities when going with app services and Azure functions. So I think, more and more is moving towards the managed identities. That's kind of the state-of-the-art way to secure the interaction between resources, and Azure functions is getting more and more support for the different services that you can combine with Azure functions on Azure. In the same context, there was also a new release of the Durable Functions extension, which is now version 2.7.0. And the most prominent new feature is Azure Durable Functions now supports identity-based connections, which is the same, which wasn't available for Durable Functions until now. And with 2.7, we have it. Of course, 2.7 is not yet part of the extension bundle mechanism, so you have to install it manually if you want to make use of that. Then this week was Cosmos DB, and Mark Duker had a talk at the Cosmos DB, of course, with Azure Functions, Ebly Realtime, and Cosmos DB. And the topic was building a fully featured scalable Jet app, making use of those mainly three components in order to get things going. I have referenced the slide deck within the show notes. And within the slide deck, you also can jump to the recording of the session by Mark. And I have also referenced the GitHub repository that's linked to the fully featured scalable Jet app, which contains all the code that is needed in order to get things running. So if you want to take a look behind the scenes, then that's the place to go. Then last thing from the serverless side, there is a public preview now for stable URLs for preview environments in Azure Static Web Apps. So with Azure Static Web Apps, of course, you had stable URLs from the beginning for your productive or for your real workload for the production environments. And for the preview environments, it was a temporary URL. Now, usually you also wanted to share that, and it was not cool if it changed. So now within public preview, this new feature is available in order to support stable URLs also for preview environments. For that, you have to make some adjustments within your GitHub Actions. That's also described here and with an additional reference in this preview announcement blog post. So if you want to make use of that, you can do by now. Nevertheless, it's preview. Now, switching from the purely serverless world to the container world with a little segue over the container apps. There is one repository that I would like to highlight by Tom Karkova that you probably know from Kada, where he is one of the main maintainers. But he is working at Microsoft now in the API management area. And he has a really cool repository, which is a playground around bringing together an end-to-end scenario consisting of Azure Container Apps and the Azure API management and how to bring those things together. I think a very natural combination and definitely valuable to see this here. With that, let's switch to the real hardcore container world, namely Kubernetes. And there I want to draw your attention to an InfoQ primer, which are booklets or very small books that are publicly available and published by or provided by InfoQ on very different topic. And this week there was a new one around Kubernetes resource management, how it works and what to do. Of course, again, free to download. So I think definitely a valuable resource if you are working in the Kubernetes area. And then from the broader ecosystem, there was this week another edition of the community call of Dapper, which has nothing to do with SAP. But this week, the community call purely focuses on the release highlights of version 1.7. So if you want to catch up with the release highlights with the latest and greatest in Dapper, then I think this session is definitely a good starting point. With that, let's switch to DevOps and GitHub, which is purely GitHub this week. One feature announcement, which is, I think, super important for colorblind folks. There is now a Tritanopia colorblind theme beta. Super difficult name from my perspective. But I guess that has something to do with the medical description of colorblindness. I'm not sure. But with that, the important thing is you can now activate different themes for if you're colorblind on your GitHub profile settings in order to have a different appearance, which is especially important, for example, if you review pull requests or something like that. So that should really help you, and I think is a super valuable addition to the features already there for theming. Then one engineering blog post by GitHub, which is very interesting, on how GitHub improved their Git push times through faster server-side hooks. That is a very interesting read around, well, why they did that change, how they did that change, and what were their lessons learned on this change that, according to their measurements, really drastically released the push times. Then another blog post by GitHub focusing on security, which is, I think, one of the biggest topics for GitHub. 5 simple things every developer can do to ship more secure code. And this blog post is really about 5 basics that you can do, that you can use when using GitHub in order to make your code more secure. It's of course, CodeQL, making CodeQL part of your workflow. Then Dependabot, who most of us, I think, use it, then protected branches, GitHub Actions, and so on. So I think that's really valuable, quite short, crisp description of those 5 things to consider that I think everybody should read. Then, again, back to some feature or product updates around organization profiles. So I think quite some time ago, GitHub shipped the option to have profiles not only on the repository level and on your own personal GitHub personal GitHub setup, however that's called, or your personal GitHub profile, but also organizations can have a profile page that is kind of the representation of the company within GitHub, or the organization within GitHub. I have to say it that way. And that was good. So you could put in public readmes on organization level, which introduced what this organization does. Now, that was purely public. So everybody got the same information when moving to that one. Now, organizations, of course, also have private repos and have organization members. And you had no chance to have to make a distinction between those public readmes on organization level and those for organization members. And with this new feature update, GitHub is now enabling that. So you can have a different representation of your organization for your internal organization members. And then another feature update, this time for code spaces, with respect to multi-repository and mono-repo scenarios. So if you are developing microservice applications, you probably stumbled either across multi-repositories or mono-repositories, which are the two big ways how to set up your repositories. Both come with pros and cons, and there is quite some religious discussion around them. As I said, both have the pros and cons, and probably you choose at some point in time one of them. And now code spaces support them because the setup for them was a bit clumsy before, especially for multi-repositories. And you can now configure your code spaces in a decent way in order to enable especially those two scenarios. Then, from the broader Microsoft ecosystem, really in the broader sense, there is one talk from the Azure and AI conference that I would like to bring to your attention that took place in April in Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken, by Clemens Vastas, who is the Microsoft go-to person when it comes to eventing in general. And he gave a talk about Azure Event Hubs, the architect's cut around patterns, features, architectures, and internals around Azure Event Hubs. If you are using them, I definitely highly recommend this video. Then one blog post by Gregor Sati around Grafana. Microsoft Azure announced that they will have a Grafana service sooner than later. And that was kind of the motivation for Gregor to look a bit into that topic. And he focuses on Grafana alert rules, which are a bit of a different beast. Contact points and notification policies with Azure, and where he came across some issues or how to set things up properly. That's what this blog post is about. He's of course not using the not yet available Grafana service, but he is using a local Grafana dashboard and set things up, but in conjunction with Azure. Then two updates that I think are interesting. First of all, Node.js 18 was released this week. That's the next LTS version of the Node.js 16. Will be supported until April 2025, so that's really quite some time. And that's available since this week, and there are a lot of new features available in there, like a built-in fetch API that is basically taking Undigi and using that, and a stream API, and so on and so forth. Test runner modules. There is an experimental support for loading packages via HTTPS, so you do not have to have a node modules folder anymore. But that's experimental. And well, that came out this week. I think it really looks great. But where there is light, there is shadow, I would say. There is also a very valuable video, again, by Golo Roden, about Node.js 18 and his taking on the way or on the direction that Node.js is going, and what are kind of the downsides that are there due to the things that they made. For example, taking Undigi as an underlay for fetch, because this does not support HTTPS 2. So definitely, if you are in the Node area and think about Node.js 18 upgrading, then I highly recommend this video. There will also be a live stream next week, I think, about upgrading an app from Node.js, I guess 16 to 18. So that's then also something that you should watch. And then one last thing about Go development. The Go Developer Survey 2021 came out, and that was really an interesting one. So quite some interesting news or results of the survey in there. For example, which operations do use Go? So technology, of course, is the biggest one, being ahead a lot. But there is the next one is financial services. That really surprised me that there is such a big usage of Go in financial services. Well, there is a lot of more really interesting information around how Go is used, where Go is used, and so on, and how teams are set up. And there is also one very interesting thing around on what platforms it is used. Of course, first things are AWS, and then Google, and then there is Azure. But there is also one interesting thing. Let's see if I find it. Yeah. What do the Go developers deploy their programs to? And finally, there is quite a big, or still a quite big usage of EC2 instances of virtual machines. Then, of course, Kubernetes, AWS Lambda, and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the scale, but still there are Azure functions. That was something that surprised me. So there is really the usage of the custom language feature within Azure that is used within Azure Functions, that is used by the Go developers. I was surprised by that because it was really quiet around that feature. So it seemed that nobody really took that up. But obviously there is some usage. Now, if you're a Go developer, anyway, that's definitely an interesting survey to take a look at. And with that, let's switch to the world in between, the twilight zone between SAP and Microsoft. And there I only have one video. Of course, the SAP on Azure video podcast. As every week, this week it's focusing more on the SAP on Azure topic. Talking about moving or migrating your setup from availability sets to availability zones in order to improve or minimize downtimes and make things more resilient. I think for SAP on Azure users, that's definitely something to take a closer look at. And with that, I would like to switch to educations and events. There was another live stream this week by Golo Roden and Hannes Leutloff around live code review. And it was on Tuesday evening, I think. It was amazing from my perspective. So I was really completely hooked up to the video. I completely forgot time. It is, I think, 3 hours. It was great. So definitely worth watching. I enjoyed every minute. Then another video by Eberhard Wolf about a talk. I think he gave that already some time ago, and I think that's a new video or a new recording about do we worship complexity? And that's a really valuable talk about, well, how to deal with complexity and over engineering, and how the organization also has an influence, of course, on that topic. Then 2 conferences that took place this week, where I have referenced the recordings. First thing is the Azure Cosmos DB conference that we already had with the contribution by Mark. I have referenced the YouTube playlist with all the talks that have been available, including the live streams. So there have been different live streams for the different time zones. And there are now the single talks getting cut out. So the playlist is not finalized, I would say, yet. So there will be some updates happening. If you do not find the video that you're looking for, I would go to the live streams. And then there was the Azure Live NL, which also had several sessions all over Azure. There were studio sessions, there were digital sessions, there is some behind the scenes stuff available. And this took place this week, and there is not yet a real video cut down, so you have to go to the live streams if you want to find something. I have referenced the 2 live streams for the studio sessions and the digital sessions because they are not listed yet. They are just hidden, so you will not find them when you search them on YouTube. And with that, let's switch to the last section for today, namely developer experience. There is one blog post that I would like to highlight from available on DevTio around why use GitHub Copilot and Copilot Labs. It describes some practical use cases for the AI pair programmer. So it tells you what to expect, what not to expect, what are the use cases and the ways that you should think about Copilot. And if you have not yet taken a look at that and have access to Copilot, there is a so-called Copilot Labs. That's an addition to a Copilot, I would say. And it, as the name says, focuses on some lab previews, so some experimental applications that are intending to improve your developer experience. And what is really cool is the explain feature. So you can have within GitHub Copilot, you can mark within GitHub Copilot Labs, you can mark some piece of code and let it explain by GitHub Copilot. That's really a super nice feature. So if you have access, definitely try that out. And yeah, be surprised what comes out. And with that, last thing for today, again, thanks to Golo Roden who brought that up. As I said, Golo is now moving also towards Go. And within one tweet, he mentioned a framework called Cobra, which is a framework for modern CLI apps. And that's for CLI apps in Go. And yeah, I think that's something, or that's one of the big use cases for Go, developing CLIs. And I think if you're developing CLIs and if you want not to craft everything by yourself, then, well, take a look at this little framework. And with that, I'm at the end of today's session. I hope I had some news for you, some interesting stuff to catch up from all over the place. Next week, there will be no video, no audio due to personal reasons. I will, however, push out the news via the GitHub repository, so you will find a curated list of news, but there won't be any video available next week. Now, with that, I wish you a great week. See you in 2 weeks again. I'm at the DSAG Technology Days in the week after next week. So if you're there, happy to meet you in person. So just get in touch with me. I'm there. Now with that, see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, bye.